I think every financial services customer, most customers believe that their challenges are unique to them. Sitting in the seat, I see a lot of different customers, and most challenges are pretty similar. They do have different nuances with their company culture, and that can influence whether or not they think they need something built out. For instance, if they've always had something built that's special for them, they may feel that that's necessary.
Hey, Renee.
Hi, how are you doing?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm good.
Thank you so much for coming here today. Ever since I started working on GenAI models, I think that FSI was one of the hottest markets to go to, maybe even the first one. And it seems that there's a lot of progress being done there with generative AI. Would you agree?
I think from what I've heard, and I think I've read from several different publications, that it's probably one of the larger, if not the largest, industry that's using and adopting generative AI. I think it's largely due to, obviously, there's money involved, so there's more assets to deploy for generative AI, and there's a lot of compliance, regulation, things that need to be taken care of in terms of back office that could really be used, like GenAI could really help with those types of workloads.
All right, so I think this is the main reason I wanted to speak with you about it, because I don't think I necessarily hacked up what is FSI and what should I do if I want to target FSI as a generative AI builder, and who's better to ask those questions than you?
Sure, sure.
Yeah.
So largely financial services, we split them up into a couple of different categories. Capital markets, you can think about like stocks, bonds, trading in your own portfolio, but then you can also think about like companies that trade or need to get large amounts of certain foreign currencies to do like foreign transactions. There's also banking, which is classically, your checking, savings accounts, also credit cards. We also have insurance where, I think we more think about it in terms of health insurance, but life insurance, property and casualty insurance, and there's payments. That can be further subdivided, but largely we're talking about, the movement of money, from one place to the other, hopefully sometimes to your own pocket, right?
Yeah, I think that the first thing that comes to mind, at least for me, when I think about financial services, is a lot of documents. I have zero understanding. What I usually do is just send it to my brother, who is an accountant, like, read it, tell me what you think. I'm not even bothering at this point, right? Read all those contracts, all those documents. And I'm guessing there's a lot more things that are tedious than just those reports.
Yeah. So I think due to various things in the United States, our market is particularly interesting. And I think a lot of markets have this where there's like a good amount of regulation around financial services. And they're really to protect the customer. So for example, checking, like your checking account in the United States is FDIC insured to $250,000, meaning like if you deposit $250,000 in the bank, there's, you won't lose it if that bank goes under, up to $250,000. So your next dollar may be slightly at risk. But because of those regulations, there are a lot of like different activities that the bank needs to do to maintain that and keep those monies safe. And that adds lots of various activities. And in Wall Street, we call that largely back office and middle office type work. So that doesn't actually have to do with the generation of revenue itself within like a bank, for example, but more dealing with, the important other things that you'd have to deal with. Those are more of a cost center. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it kind of. Like, I think I understand like 70% of it.
Okay, sure.
But that's like 100% more than I understand all those finance documents in general. Also, I didn't specifically ask you, what do you do at AWS that revolves around GenAI,
Sure.
GenAI and FSI?
Sure. I'm a financial services industry specialist. And in my role, I've been in this role for 3 years. I've focused on capital markets, banking, and insurance customers. And I basically help our financial services customers in those categories with business conversations, I'm usually paired with a technical specialist who's able to give more specifics about the more technical aspects. But my background is in financial services, and I worked in Wall Street my entire career until I came here.
Hmm. And would you say that this is, do you have like ranking or shares on how large the FSI market in GenAI regarding other markets or?
Don't quote me on this. Roughly, from what I've heard, that I think it's around 20% of total spend is in financial services. This is what I read from some publications. So that's a ballpark, obviously not something from AWS or anything like that. But roughly 20% of GenAI spend is supposed to be something financial services related. Yeah.
Okay, where because I'm guessing, right, there's a lot of places to automate there, or just because there's a lot of spend.
There's there's certain activities in financial services where you have a lot of people doing the same type of activity. And so I think that a lot of GenAI spend has been trying to target those particular areas. Like for instance, document processing. That's I think for example, for mortgages, when you're applying to get a mortgage, you have a lot of documents you need to go through. Or if you're dealing with insurance, there's also a lot of documents you need to go through when you apply for the policy and also when you have to deal with a claim. So there's a lot of documents and a lot of things that a lot of people do. And I think a lot of what our customers are thinking is how can we make that faster and better with generative AI? And so a lot of them are targeting those areas.
And it seems that, well, at least from my experience, some of the things that I'm seeing in the market, maybe you can say how you see it. A lot of Gen AI companies really targeting FSI or financial use cases.
Yeah, that's a lot of them are trying to figure out what use cases can we lean into. And I think some Gen AI companies are trying to get more specific with certain use cases and seeing if that really helps land and expand in terms of their product set. It's interesting what can be done.
So Renee, you mentioned there's a lot of interesting things to do in this market. What should I do if I want to build for FSI? Give me like a cover or an overview of the market.
So I think one thing to think about in terms of financial services, and to be honest, you could probably apply it to many different places, is what type of workloads are we targeting? What type of activities are we hoping to augment with generative AI? And I like to think about them in two broad categories. They're not all the categories that exist, but for simplicity's sake, I think it's good to think of it in two categories. One of them is this a cost center or is this something that could generate revenue for me? So for instance, thinking about the risk monitoring for certain portfolios. The risk monitoring is just a cost center. It's something that must be done. And you may think about it in terms of how quickly, what quality you have there, and you may want to improve that with generative AI. You can also think about it in terms of how much one spends on that type of activity, and it gives you a good indication of how much that customer may think about spending on it. So if they're not spending a lot on that problem, maybe that's not the best problem to go after if you want to start on it. That's not to say that risk itself isn't. This is just a general statement.
Yeah.
The second category, I think, more relates to hedge funds, but you could think about it in terms of revenue. Are there ways we can accelerate and generate more revenue in better and faster ways with generative AI? So for instance, a hedge fund, when they're looking at different investments that they might make, using generative AI to analyze the stocks or read through materials quickly, analyze information that's coming out in the news as quickly as possible, they are incentivized to learn that as quickly as possible so that they can express that in a trade and make the most money possible. So they're not thinking about the cost of that entirely. They're also thinking about what they could potentially get as revenue from the potential, profit from that trade. So I'd like to think about it in those two categories. Obviously, one is a bit sexier than the other, but I've seen use cases where we definitely have folks going after this financial analyst, investment analyst type of Gen AI use case. And then we definitely have a lot of use cases that are going after these cost centers. I like to think about it in those two categories. We have productivity as well. That's obviously going to be in thinking more about it, the cost side of it.
Maybe let's, I really like this division. I think that the operating system, like the mindset that you have to have in order to tackle each one of them is a bit different. Maybe let's try to ground it a little bit. Let's take an example for every part to see how it works and like what is the mindset one needs to have in order to build something good with GenAI.
Yeah. So
Let's start with the one with the costs, right? We want
yeah,
to essentially what happens, if I understood you correctly, I have now a team of analysts and I want to either scale the amount of work they're doing, right? And essentially get more work with this team,
yeah.
right? Or no, just add more work instead of adding more people.
Right, right. So maybe we can go to the intelligent document processing use case. So for instance, let's just use a mortgage example. So let's say when you apply for a mortgage, you have a lot of documents you need to actually submit, and then your mortgage company will need to process them, understand what's on it. And to do that as quickly as possible, they have a lot of people, they have software involved, and they're trying to think of how much does this process cost me? How quickly can I run this entire process? And what's the quality? What's my accuracy on all of that? So you understand those three metrics. When we're using generative AI, we're trying to improve those three metrics as best as we can, and while giving people a good experience, as like a good customer experience. And then I think when you think about it from that type of lens, the customer should know typically, how much these things cost them. So it gives them a good idea of how much they're willing to spend on an item or on a particular process. This gives you a good ballpark. So for example, if I had a generative AI intelligent document processing, solution, and it's going to cost pretty close to what someone's already spending for it, that's probably not going to be good enough. You probably need to make it cheaper or better for them to be interested. So I think understanding the benchmarks is really helpful to thinking about what does my GenAI product need to do for the customer so that they're interested.
It seems that I'm guessing you have to have at least the same quality or above. Latency, in this case, I'm guessing is not the issue.
It can be the issue. It can be the issue. But yeah, you want to see improvement significantly so, because there's also challenges and pain involved with switching over to something new. Now with generative AI, I think we tend to see that it's a little bit faster than some of the classic workload migrations that we've seen in the past. But that doesn't mean, in terms of how like an executive might think, they're thinking like, how much pain is this going to cause me? How risky is this to me? And am I willing to do it based on those factors? So whatever the upside is needs to be worth that challenge.
What would you say a good rule of thumb for the price calculation? Let's say I cost them to use my solution 70%. Is it something that we'll even consider, or do we have to be significantly lower?
I think that's a hard question to answer, because you also need to understand how much they total spend on that particular process. So for example, like I think we have our prices on the internet in terms of like how much it costs per page. 70% might be okay, or it might be, it may not be that part of that process might not be that expensive compared to the whole thing. So you have to think about like absolute terms and also in terms of like percentage terms. Mm-hmm. Like, is it going to save $50,000 over the course of the year? For a large customer, they won't really care. On the other hand, if it saves like several $1,000,000, they might care more. So it depends like on both of those aspects. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I didn't think about the fact that usually you're trying to just replace parts of a process instead of replacing the entire process, which makes sense. It's a big change, and GenAI is still not as deterministic or stable, predictable, whatever the word that you want to use it today. So yeah, you have to really look at the entire process that you're planning to switch and see where exactly do you fit in there.
Yeah, exactly. What part of that entire process? I think a lot of our customers are still having a human in the loop. I think that may also be because of certain regulatory requirements, and that I think for peace of mind, that just might be easier for them. So they still feel like maybe the larger expenses of that process may still be there. But sometimes 70% is a 70% less, or even 30% less might be worth it. So it really depends. Yeah.
And I guess, at least from the way you described it, that most of the, let's say, successful products or application in production are in this type of problem, right? Because it's much more framed and it's like better suited for showing people, hey, this is how much money I can save to you. Take it.
I mean, I actually would say that most of our customers that are moving to something new, there's several aspects that are improving in that newer solution. So not just the time, it's usually not just one thing. It's several things. And I think it puts them in a better position to take on more volume if that happens to come without having to hire more people, which tends to be something that a lot of our customers are looking to be more flexible when possible.
But in terms of the two aspects that you mentioned in the use cases, or the growing versus the cost, would you say that most of the use cases in production right now belongs to the cost category or to the growing category?
I think probably most would be to the cost categories. I think the revenue categories are those types of use cases are a little more challenging, but we do have customers that are tackling both.
So maybe let's delve in a little to the revenue type of use cases. How would you describe that?
So the classic use case would be for a hedge fund. Let's say we're looking at different markets and we're trying to analyze information as quickly as possible because the hedge fund next door is also doing the same thing. And we want to do it as quickly as possible with all the best information. And we need to absorb large amounts of text as quickly as possible. I think using generative AI to help speed that process up as quickly as possible seems to be a really big benefit in terms of making sure that you're able to come up with a good idea based on the price of an asset before it changes. And I think before it changes is probably like the most important part. When someone else figures out what you've already figured out, then they'll buy it and then the price will go up and then you won't have the opportunity to make as much money. So I think that's probably where a lot of the revenue use cases where a lot of our customers are looking. I think a lot of customers are also using it to improve their customer experience. Now, I think when you can use GenAI to improve the customer experience beyond what we think is like, how can I phrase this? If they're able to delight their customer using generative AI, let's say you're asking about your checking account, you're annoyed. They pull it up faster than you believe. They understand the question you're going to ask before you've even asked it. And they're able to anticipate things that you're going to be asking about on the phone call. That's probably better for you. That doesn't translate immediately into a revenue opportunity, but that does mean in the future, you might value them as a company more and your relationship with them more. So it's not it's kind of cost, but also like potentially looking into like, how can I make my customer find my services more valuable? So that's like a slightly different view on that too.
Yeah, I think this is something that is not specifically for GenAI, the entire customer experience.
Yeah.
This is like, I would say, like rather horizontal. This is
horizontal, yeah.
Horizontal, right. Yes. Accent issues. But this is like kind of a cross, but it's interesting to see that like in FSI, this is also something which is very, very growing. I'm guessing you have to tailor-made it to this type of industry, or?
So actually, we have a lot of contact centers, a lot of agents in financial services. I think across the industries I spoke of, capital markets a little less so, but more for your, like, if you're dealing with individual investors, banking, insurance, there's a lot of times you have to call people. So the ability to speed that process up, and if you think about it, I don't know how often you have to call your insurance company or your bank. You're usually annoyed that you have to call them. So you want that process to be as painless and easy as possible. And I think that is actually a really great use case for generative AI too. Not just to understand broadly, we can use GenAI to read the transcripts from all the phone calls and understand what's wrong with our website, and perhaps we should have a different option there. or some new options so that people aren't calling in so much. I think that use case is a pretty good use case. There's usually a lot of call center agents. And what we want to do is just make that process easier so that they're able to pull up the information faster, right? They're able to have a summarization of what you last called about. You don't have to explain, if you were calling about your insurance. Unfortunately, I recently had a car accident. So if I called again about my car accident, perhaps that agent would have that information surfaced to them immediately, right? Instead of having to look at it, ask for the code, things like that. Then that makes it a lot faster and a lot more pleasant for the person calling in. And then, of course, you would just have them on the phone less. And then that would just be more efficient for everybody.
Yeah, I don't remember a single time where I was not super annoyed when I called my insurance company. So it was a very accurate description.
Yeah, I think all of us understand that use case. So we're annoyed that we have to call in. So, I think using generative AI to figure out why people are calling in, great use case. There's also, you're not actually facing off directly with the customer when they're calling in. You're doing a call transcription and looking at it afterwards. It's a lot less risky. So I think that's a great use case and something that a lot of our customers are looking into.
Okay, Renee, this was a great overview of the FSI field. Now maybe let's hear about customers in production.
Sure. We have a lot of customers in production and a lot of them are public use cases. I'll just mention them broadly. I won't mention any specific names, but I think these are things that you could probably look up on YouTube, reinvent YouTube for AWS, and you'll probably find a ton of them. I think one of our pretty big use cases is with a hedge fund that has a financial analyst, where basically you're able to ask questions about certain types of investments. It can pull the structured data for your request, make charts for you. And I think that's pretty valuable in terms of what a hedge fund does. It's able to pull that information quickly and synthesize, give you the data that helps you make the investment decision.
Where would you say this is for the cost part, the revenue part?
That one would be for the revenue part, yeah. And I think as a side note, that's why you'll see hedge funds are comfortable spending more on generative AI because they do see that there's a potential for this revenue upside. They're not as constrained in terms of cost. They will look at cost, though, when they compare certain solutions head to head.
What would you say were things that worked well for them when they got into production?
I'll just say in general, one of the trends of our customers that are doing well with generative AI is that they always start with the crawl, walk, run. I think crawl is usually some sort of internal use case that they're comfortable surfacing to all or some portion of their employees. They get good feedback on that, and that gives them the confidence to do something that's a little more closer to the use case that they're targeting. For some of our banking customers, that might be something that's helping an agent with a customer directly, and then running is obviously facing directly with the customer themselves, so a chatbot. But a lot of our customers find more success when they're able to build that confidence with generative AI, not being worried about hallucinations, but then they're able to actually comfortably see what's going on. And then they also have a lot of people using it at the same time. So you're kind of testing the next thing you want to do, but without actually having to have the full risk of that. You're able to kind of see how things are working, what you can improve on before you make it a riskier use case.
Okay, sounds a good approach. Any other customers that use that or other things in order to put GenAI in production?
One of our banking customers that mostly deals with lending, they've built a pretty impressive multi-purpose tool that does a wide array of things. They can do marketing, they can do legal, and to be honest, sometimes there's a certain individual there who is pretty adept at picking up whatever needs to be done and able to build it. And I've seen that that's been really impressive. I think I showed him one product once, and he was able to tell me that they were testing 2 weeks later. And I was like, my goodness, he's like, yeah, we're already testing that. And I was just like, oh my goodness, I didn't even I just sent you the paper. We didn't even meet up about it. So sometimes our customers can be very impressive in terms of what they can pick up. They either have great teams or, I think this particular individual is just so excited about generative AI that they're trying to figure out everything possible of what they can do. So those are pretty impressive. I have
I
to
get
say.
it. Generative AI is it's very exciting right now. Right? We are sitting in a room talking about it. So
Yeah, I'm certainly very excited about it. I think that I personally, if I didn't use it almost all the time, I think I'd probably be less excited about it. But I love using it. I love how quickly it brings me answers. And I think, when you work with customers that are thinking the same thing, it's pretty incredible what they can build quickly. Yeah.
So as someone who works a lot with customers and seen a lot of use cases, some of them in production, some of them in POC, some of them are neither. What would you say if I want to now build an application for FSI? What are the things that I need to consider, or what are the rules of thumb that I have to comply to?
Yeah. So I think where we've seen customers be very successful is where they've gotten a really good understanding of the business problem that they have. So this is not necessarily talking about coding, but understanding the business problem has been very helpful. Having a business stakeholder there has been really helpful in terms of getting the right understanding of what's going on. So I'd say that's number one. Number two is making sure that any potential bottlenecks you might encounter with compliance or approvals or risk or any type of regulatory issues, to bring them along first, to have them meet all together when you're trying to build that use case all together. I think people enjoy being taken for the ride. So I think that's make sure that everyone is on board to start. And then the second thing is that when you're looking at the use case, that all the pieces of data are there and that you're using good, clean data for that. Now, this is a general challenge with a lot of businesses, not just FSI, having good, clean data, but I think that's really important with generative AI. So I think that's something to also emphasize. And then making sure that you're picking the right tool for the right use case. I think you can always throw the kitchen sink, but being very intentional about that. And then, being aware of what might be coming out next is helpful in terms of not wasting effort and building something that might already be built for you later. So I think broadly, I think those are pretty good rules of thumb. And then along with that, from what I mentioned before of the, crawl, walk, run, don't try to do the hardest use case in one step. Break it off into, stages in which each stage has a good outcome at the end that would be beneficial to your business.
When I'm trying to figure out what to build, how would you advise me to look for an idea or for an area to focus on?
Yeah, personal friends have come to me about thinking about what to build. I've had certain friends suggest certain use cases in FSI or another. But I think one thing I like to think about is thinking about the cost. Is it a cost center or is it a revenue center? It gives you a good idea of how much a customer is willing to spend on the problem. And then the second is how many people do that every day? How often do they do that particular task? It gives you a good idea of how often is that thing being done or that particular use case needed, that if you were to build a solution for it, and then compare it against, what your other alternatives would be. For example, if you had a use case that 20 people would use, but they do it all the time, and they're working at it night and day, you could maybe have to compare that with a use case where they're doing the same process, but they're only doing it once a month. So you have to think about which one is going to be better in terms of, revenue, in terms of your business. And then another thing also to consider is what persona you can talk to. What personas do you actually have your foot in the door with? So if you're dealing with a chief risk officer, maybe dealing with his once a month problem that is something you should do. But it really depends. But I think about it from that type of lens. how big is the problem? How many people have to deal with that problem? And who is incentivized to fix that problem? And do they have budget? Is that a cost center, or is that someone who has their own budget and can decide, where they can spend their own money? If it's the business side, for example, I think that they're comfortable going after smaller problems because they know that, that will help them broadly in terms of potential revenue opportunities or making fewer mistakes, which are both important things to deal with.
Now, I'm hearing what you're saying right now, and it seems that like the way to go is to find something you can actually replicate and scale with other companies. But from everything I heard about FSI is that they're all like snowflakes, or in a sense where they all want their own model. Everything needs to be fine-tuned. Is it true? Is it just a myth? How to handle this type of situation?
I think every financial services customer, most customers believe that their challenges are unique to them. Sitting in the seat, I see a lot of different customers, and by and large, I think most of the customer challenges are pretty similar. They do have different nuances with their company culture, and that can influence whether or not they think they need something built out. For instance, if they've always had something built that's special for them, they may feel that that's necessary. I think it depends on the use case, by and large, unless it's like I think we haven't found a lot of use cases that requires that much customization, but I think working with the customer, understanding what their challenges are, can really help with that type of challenge. If you understand their problem, then they will be more comfortable, working with you. I think where we have stumbling blocks is if we broadly generalize, and then they would say like, no, I'm different from XYZ. I'm not the same as every bank on the street. And I think understanding them better before you go into that conversation will help you so that you don't have to deal with that type of conversation as much. But I think by and large, many of the use cases are the same. Some of the challenges that they have with implementing those use cases, they're similar too. But yeah.
Talked a lot about the current stage of GenAI and FSI. How would you think it will change in a year, 2 years, 5 years from now?
This is hard to predict the future. So this is based on my views and my views only, not on AWS's or anybody else's. I think in the next year or so, you'll see a lot of customers where financial services customers, where they're moving their use cases to production and they're getting more of those implemented, and they're really looking and seeing the benefits of generative AI. I think we're at the same time, agents has been really big. I think our customers are going to get better, and we already have customers now that are very actively using agents. And I think we'll have more of that going into the future. I think what will be interesting going into the future beyond that, although this is probably just more of my own thoughts entirely, is how those pieces are going to fit together. I think potentially general productivity will get better. The generative AI tools will get better and they'll be more intuitive. And I think right now we're in this weird phase where we are, like, if you think about how you use a generative AI now for like a non-technical user, a lot of generative AI non-technical users use it kind of like Google. We Google things. And then we had to learn how to use generative AI. Now we're just seeing that some of the generative AI tools are understanding how normal humans are using generative AI and kind of catering to that. So I think while some people think that you need to understand prompt engineering, and some are like, no, it'll understand it for you. I think we're going to get into this weird place where it's kind of in between those two things. Obviously, you'll be better if you can, speak to the generative AI model that you're talking to. With prompt engineering, you'll probably get a faster answer. But I think there's going to be a marrying of those things. I think people will be getting more integrated into that, more comfortable with the way that they're currently using most of the tools that they use in their normal lives. I think a lot of them already have generative AI embedded into them. They don't even know it. So I think that that's where I think things will go. In terms of FSI and productivity and the potential gains there, it's kind of mirroring all of those things together. How will that look and how will that evolve? I think it'll be pretty interesting.
Well, thank you so much for this amazing overview of the landscape of GenAI and FSI, what's happening now, and a glimpse to the future. Really so happy that you came here today.
Thank you so much. I really appreciated this. I really appreciate the opportunity working with you guys at AI 21. Big fan for a while. And I just wanted to set this little disclaimer that the views and opinions I express today are my own and do not represent those of Amazon Web Services.
So maybe I should say as well that the views and opinions that I represent here are my own and do not represent AI 21 at all.
Yes.
Great. Again, thank you so much. Really was so fun to meet you in person. And stay tuned for more episodes of YAAP.